The dust kicked up around Jake Morrison's worn leather boots as he approached the town square of Cedar Creek. The year was 1887, and the small Texas settlement buzzed with unusual activity. Word had spread like wildfire across the frontier about Mayor Henderson's desperate announcement. The town needed women, and they were offering something unheard of in those harsh times. Jake had been riding for 3 days straight, his horse Thunder barely managing the final stretch into town. At 28, he was already weathered by years of cattle drives and lonely nights under star-filled skies. His calloused hands gripped the reins tighter as he saw the crowd gathered in the center of town. Mayor Henderson stood on a wooden crate, his voice carrying over the murmuring crowd of cowboys, ranchers, and drifters who had come from miles around. "Gentlemen, as you all know, our town is struggling. We have fewer than 30 women for over 200 men. The railroad company has agreed to bring us a special train car filled with ladies seeking new lives on the frontier." Jake dismounted and tied Thunder to the hitching post outside Murphy's saloon. The bartender, old Pete, nodded grimly as Jake approached. "You hear about this bride business, Morrison?" "Hard to miss it," Jake replied, ordering whiskey. "Sounds too good to be true." "That's because it probably is," Pete said, sliding the glass across the bar. "Henderson's been talking to some fancy businessman from back east. Word is these ain't exactly willing participants." Jake's stomach tightened. He had hoped to find a wife, someone to share the small ranch he had been building for the past 5 years. The loneliness was eating at him, but not like this. Not if it meant taking advantage of desperate women. The train whistle echoed across the prairie the next morning, announcing the arrival that would change everything. Jake stood with the other men, his hat in his hands, watching as the special car was uncoupled from the main train. The conductor, a thin man in a fancy suit, stepped down and began speaking with Mayor Henderson. "Gentlemen, please form an orderly line," Henderson announced. "Each man will have the opportunity to select a bride. The price is $50, which covers transportation and processing fees." Jake's blood ran cold when he saw them. 23 women stepped off the train, but they were not the hopeful mail-order brides he had expected. Most looked terrified, their clothes torn and dirty. Some had bruises on their faces and arms. At the back of the group, separated by heavy, iron shackles, walked a young Comanche woman. She was different from the others. While the white women cowered and wept, she held her head high. Her long black hair fell past her shoulders, and her dark eyes burned with defiance rather than fear. She could not have been more than 20 years old, but there was strength in the way she carried herself despite the chains. "What's the story with the Indian girl?" asked Tom Bradley, a rancher from the next county. The conductor smirked. "That one's special. Captured during a raid last month. The army was going to send her to a reservation, but we thought she might serve better as a wife to one of you fine gentlemen. She's young and strong, perfect for frontier life." Jake felt sick. This was not marriage. This was slavery with a different name. He looked around at the other men, seeing greed and lust in their eyes rather than any desire for companionship or love. Some were already reaching for their money. "I'll take the blonde one there," called out Samuel Curtis, pointing to a trembling young woman who could not have been older than 16. "The redhead's mine," shouted another man, pushing forward with his $50. One by one, the women were claimed like livestock at auction. Jake watched in horror as families were torn apart. 2 sisters clung to each other until they were forcibly separated by their new husbands. An older woman, probably someone's mother, was dragged away, crying. Through it all, the Comanche woman remained silent. She watched the proceedings with the same intensity Jake had seen in wild animals caught in traps. She was calculating, planning, waiting for her moment. None of the men seemed interested in her, perhaps intimidated by her fierce gaze or put off by her heritage. "What about the savage?" someone finally called out. "What's her price?" The conductor looked uncomfortable. "Well, she's a bit more challenging. We'd be willing to let her go for $25 to the right man, someone who can handle her." Jake's hands shook as he stepped forward. He did not know what he was doing or why, but he could not let This woman be sold to one of these men who saw her as nothing more than property to be broken. I'll take her, he announced, his voice cutting through the crowd. The other men turned to stare at him. Some laughed, others shook their heads in disbelief. You sure about that, Morrison? Called out Pete from behind the crowd. That one looks like she'd cut your throat in your sleep. Jake pulled out $25 from his leather pouch, money he had been saving for months to buy new cattle. I'm sure. The conductor eagerly took the money and gestured toward the Comanche woman. She's all yours, cowboy. Good luck taming that one. As Jake approached her, the woman's eyes met his. There was no gratitude in her gaze, only suspicion and anger. The shackles around her wrist were heavy iron, clearly meant for someone much larger. They had rubbed her skin raw, leaving bloody marks that made Jake's anger burn hotter. What's your name? He asked quietly. But she did not respond. She probably did not speak English, or perhaps she simply chose not to answer. The key to her shackles was handed to Jake along with a piece of paper declaring him her legal husband. The document was signed by a judge from some eastern city, making the whole arrangement appear legitimate. Jake crumpled the paper and stuffed it into his pocket. When he unlocked the shackles, the woman rubbed her wrists but made no move to run. She was smart enough to know she was hundreds of miles from any friendly territory, surrounded by men who would bring her back or worse if she tried to escape. My name is Jake, he said, gesturing to himself. Jake Morrison. She studied him for a long moment, then spoke her first word in accented but clear English. Why? It was a simple question, but Jake knew exactly what she meant. Why had he chosen her? Why had he paid money for her freedom? Why was he different from the others? Because what they're doing here isn't right, he answered honestly. And because everyone deserves a choice. The woman's expression softened slightly, though suspicion still clouded her dark eyes. She had learned not to trust white men, and Jake knew it would take more than words to prove he was different. As they walked toward his horse, Jake realized he had just made the most important decision of his life. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. He would never treat this woman as property. Whatever came next, they would figure it out together. The ride to Jake's ranch took 2 hours through rough terrain. The Comanche woman rode behind him on Thunder, her hands gripping the saddle rather than Jake's waist. She had not spoken another word since asking why he chose her, but Jake could feel the tension in her body as they traveled deeper into unfamiliar territory. His ranch sat in a valley surrounded by rolling hills covered with mesquite and oak trees. It was not much to look at. A small wooden house, a barn, and a corral where his 12 cattle grazed peacefully. Jake had built everything himself over the past 5 years, working from dawn to dusk to create something he could call home, as They approached the house. The woman finally spoke again. This yours? Yes, Jake replied, helping her down from the horse. It's not much, but it's honest work. She examined the property with the same calculating look she had worn in town. Jake could see her mind working, probably looking for escape routes or weapons she could use if needed. Her survival instincts were sharp, honed by whatever hardships had brought her to that train car. You hungry? Jake asked, unsure of what else to say. The situation was unlike anything he had ever faced. He had essentially purchased another human, being even if his intentions were good. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on him like a stone. The woman nodded slightly. Jake led her to the house, opening the door to his simple home. One large room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with his bed in the corner. A smaller room off to the side held supplies and tools. You can have the bedroom, Jake said, gesturing to a door he had never opened much. I'll sleep out here. She looked surprised by this offer. In her world, captives were not given private spaces or choices about where to sleep. Jake began, preparing a meal of beans, hardtack, and coffee, the same food he ate most days. As he worked, he felt her eyes on him, studying his every movement. What's your name? He asked again, stirring the beans over the fire. This time she answered. Ayana. Ayana, Jake repeated, trying to pronounce it correctly. That's a beautiful name. It means eternal flower in my language, she said quietly. My mother gave it to me because I was born during the spring bloom. Jake set 2 plates on the wooden table he had made himself. Tell me about your family. Ayana's face hardened. They are dead, killed by soldiers 3 moons ago when they attacked our camp. I'm sorry, Jake said, and meant it. He had heard stories of the Indian Wars, but they had always seemed distant and unreal. Sitting across from this woman, seeing the pain in her eyes, made the violence suddenly personal. Your people killed mine, Ayana said matter-of-factly. Why should you be sorry? Jake set down his fork. Because taking innocent lives is wrong no matter who does it. I never fought in those wars. I came to Texas to build something, not destroy. Yet you bought me like cattle, she pointed out, her dark eyes challenging him. Jake felt his cheeks burn with shame. You're right. What I did was wrong too. I couldn't let you go with one of those other men. They would have hurt you. And you will not? Ayana asked, testing him. No, Jake said firmly. I will never hurt you, and as soon as I can figure out how, I'm going to help you get back to your people. Ayana studied him for a long moment. There are no people left to return to. The reservation is far from here, and those who survived are prisoners there. Jake realized the full horror of her situation. She was completely alone in the world, with nowhere to go and no one to protect her except a stranger who had bought her freedom for $25. Then you can stay here as long as you want, he said. Not as my property, but as, I don't know, a partner maybe. Someone who helps run the ranch. Partners are equals, Ayana said. I am your slave according to your law. Jake pulled the crumpled marriage certificate from his pocket and threw it into the fireplace. The paper caught fire immediately, turning to ash within seconds. Not anymore. For the first time since he had met her, Ayana smiled. It was small and cautious, but genuine. You are different from other white men I have known. How many have you known? Jake asked. Ayana's smile faded. Too many. Soldiers who killed my family. Traitors who cheated my people. The men who captured me and put me on that train. She touched her wrists where the shackles had left marks. They all wanted to break me. I don't want to break anything, Jake said. I want to build. Maybe we can build something together. They finished their meal in comfortable silence. Jake showed Ayana around the small ranch, explaining his plans to expand the herd and maybe plant some crops next spring. She listened carefully, occasionally asking practical questions that showed she understood ranch life better than most city women would. You know about cattle? Jake asked. My people followed buffalo herds for generations, Ayana replied. I understand animals. How they move, what they need when they are sick or afraid. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jake realized he felt less lonely than he had in years. Having another person to talk to, even in these strange circumstances, filled a void he had not fully recognized. I should warn you, he said as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Some of the neighbors might not be friendly when they find out you're here. Because I am Comanche? Ayana asked. Yes, Jake admitted. There's been bad blood between the settlers and the tribes for years. Some folks around here lost family in raids. As did I, Ayana said simply. But I do not blame all white people for what some did. That would make me like them. Jake nodded, impressed by her wisdom. Still, it might be better if people think we're actually married. For your safety. Ayana considered this. A marriage, of protection, not possession? Exactly, Jake said. Partners, like you said. We help each other, watch out for each other, but you're free to leave whenever you want. And if I choose to stay? Ayana asked. Jake felt his heart skip a beat. Then I'd be honored to have you. As darkness fell, they prepared for bed. Jake gave Ayana a clean shirt to sleep in and showed her how to work the simple latch on the bedroom door. You can lock this if it makes you feel safer, he said. Thank you, Ayana said. But I do not think I need to fear you, Jake Morrison. That night, Jake lay on his bedroll by the dying fire, staring at the ceiling. He had started the day as a lonely cowboy looking for a wife. Now he was sharing his home with a woman who had every reason to hate him and his kind, yet seemed willing to give him a chance. Through the thin walls, he could hear Ayanna moving around the bedroom. He wondered what she was thinking, whether she was planning to escape in the night or if she truly meant to stay. Either choice would be her right, but Jake found himself hoping she would still be there in the morning. For the first time in his adult life, Jake Morrison had something more valuable than land or cattle. He had hope for a future that included someone else, someone who might help him build not just a ranch but a real home. Jake woke before dawn to the sound of movement outside his house. His hand instinctively reached for the rifle beside his bedroll, but he relaxed when he heard a familiar whinny from Thunder. Someone was in the corral with his horse, and since Ayanna was the only other person on the ranch, it had to be her. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sight that greeted him took his breath away. Ayanna stood in the center of the corral wearing the simple dress he had given her, but she had braided leather strips into her long black hair. Thunder, normally skittish around strangers, was nuzzling her shoulder as she whispered to him in her native language. "He likes you," Jake called out, approaching the fence slowly so as not to startle either of them. "Animals sense truth in people," Ayanna replied, continuing to stroke Thunder's neck. "He knows I mean no harm." "How did you sleep?" Jake asked. "Better than I have in many weeks," she admitted. "Your bed is soft and the walls kept out the wind." Jake had been prepared to find her gone in the morning, but seeing her there, caring for his horse as if she belonged, filled him with unexpected warmth. "Are you hungry? I can make breakfast." "I have already prepared food," Ayanna said, gesturing toward the house. "I found eggs from your chickens and wild greens growing near the stream." Jake had not even noticed he was hungry until he smelled the food cooking. They ate together on the porch, watching the sun rise over the hills. The meal was simple but flavorful, seasoned with herbs Jake did not recognize. "These greens," he said, "I never knew they were edible." "Your people see land differently than mine," Ayanna explained. "You see empty space to be filled. We see everything that is already there, waiting to be used wisely." After breakfast, Jake began his daily routine of checking the cattle and repairing fences. To his surprise, Ayanna followed him, asking questions about the ranch and offering observations about the animals. She pointed out that one of his cows was favoring her left hind leg and suggested they examine it. "You have a good eye," Jake said as they approached the limping cow. "I hadn't noticed she was hurt." Ayanna moved calmly around the animal, speaking to it in the same gentle voice she had used with Thunder. The cow stood still while Ayanna lifted its leg and examined the hoof. "Stone caught between the toes," she announced, working it free with practiced fingers. "She will be fine now." "Where did you learn to do that?" Jake asked, impressed. "My father was the best horseman in our tribe," Ayanna said with pride. "He taught me that understanding animals is understanding life itself. They do not lie or hide their feelings like people do." As the days passed, Ayanna proved to be more valuable than any hired hand Jake could have afforded. She knew which plants could be eaten and which ones healed sickness. She could track animals, predict weather changes, and spot problems with the cattle before Jake even noticed something was wrong. More importantly, she brought life to the lonely ranch. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk about their different worlds. Ayanna told him stories of her childhood, following the buffalo herds across vast plains, learning the names of every star in the night sky. Jake shared his dreams of building something lasting, something that would still be there long after he was gone. "Why did you never marry before?" Ayanna asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky purple and gold. Jake considered the question. "Never found the right woman, I suppose. Most of the ladies I met wanted city life, not this rough country, and the ones who did want frontier life." He trailed off, not wanting to seem critical. "They wanted you to take care of them," Ayanna finished. "Not to be partners in building something together." "Exactly," Jake said, surprised by her understanding. What about you? Were you married in your tribe? Ayana's face grew sad. I was promised to a warrior named Dakota. He was killed in the same battle as my father and brothers. We were to be married when the spring grass grew tall. Jake felt a stab of jealousy, followed immediately by shame. This woman had lost everything: her family, her intended husband, her entire way of life. What right did he have to feel possessive about her past? He must have been a good man, Jake said quietly. He was brave and kind. Ayana agreed. But that life is gone now. I must find new ways to live, new reasons to see tomorrow's sunrise. Their peaceful routine was broken one morning by the sound of approaching horses. Jake counted at least 6 riders coming up the valley toward his ranch. He grabbed his rifle and stepped out onto the porch, with Ayana close behind him. Stay inside, he told her, but she shook her head. If they are here for me, hiding will not help, she said calmly. Better to face trouble standing tall. The riders were led by Sheriff Williams from Cedar Creek, a fair man Jake had always respected. Behind him rode Tom Bradley, Samuel Curtis, and 3 other ranchers from the area. Their faces were grim, and Jake's stomach tightened with worry. Morning. Jake, Sheriff Williams called out as they approached. We need to have a talk. About what? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew. About the Indian woman you took from town last week, Tom Bradley said, his voice hostile. Word is you're harboring a savage who could bring her tribe down on all of us. Ayana is no threat to anyone, Jake said firmly. She's been helping me run the ranch. That's not what we heard, Samuel Curtis said. Pete from the saloon says she's been asking questions about the area, mapping out all our properties. Jake felt anger flare in his chest. That's a lie. Ayana hasn't been to town since the day I brought her home. Maybe not, Sheriff Williams said diplomatically. But people are worried. You know how things have been with the Indian troubles lately. Folks are scared. Scared of what? Ayana stepped forward, speaking for the first time. Of one woman with no weapons, no tribe, nowhere to run? The men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Up close, it was hard to see Ayana as the dangerous savage their fears had created. She looked like what she was, a young woman who had lost everything and was trying to survive. It's not personal, miss, Sheriff Williams said awkwardly. But the law says Indians have to be on reservations. I'm supposed to take you back to the territorial office. She's not just any Indian, Jake said quickly. She's my wife. The men exchanged glances. Marriage to a white man changed Ayana's legal status, but Jake could see the skepticism in their eyes. You got papers proving that? Tom Bradley asked suspiciously. Jake's heart sank. He had burned the fake marriage certificate in front of Ayana, never thinking he might need it for legal protection. The papers were lost in a fire, he said, which was technically true. But we can get new ones from the judge. Until then, I'm afraid she needs to come with us, Sheriff Williams said reluctantly. It's for everyone's safety. No. Ayana's voice was quiet but firm. I will not go back to cages. She stepped closer to Jake, and without thinking, he put his arm around her shoulders. The gesture was protective, but it felt natural, as if they had been standing together like this for years instead of days. She stays here, Jake said. As my wife, she has the right to be on my property. Jake, don't make this harder than it has to be, Sheriff Williams warned. I respect you, but I have to follow the law. Then follow this law, Ayana said, surprising everyone. She turned to Jake, her dark eyes meeting his with determination. Jake Morrison, will you be my husband in truth? Will you stand with me against all who would separate us? Jake understood what she was asking. This was not about love or romance. This was about survival, about 2 people choosing to face the world together rather than alone. Yes, he said without hesitation. Ayana, will you be my wife? Will you help me build a life here as partners and equals? I will, she replied solemnly. They turned back to the mounted men, standing hand in hand. There, Jake said. We're married by common law, witnessed by all of you, She's legally my wife now. Sheriff Williams sighed heavily. I suppose that settles it legally, but Jake, you better make sure she doesn't cause any trouble. People are still nervous. The only trouble around here is fear and ignorance. Jake replied firmly. Ayanna is part of this community now, whether folks like it or not. As the riders departed, Jake and Ayanna remained on the porch, still holding hands. They had just committed to a life together born out of necessity rather than romance. But Jake found he did not regret the decision. Are you sorry? Ayanna asked, quietly. No, Jake said, squeezing her hand. Are you? No, she replied. We are partners now, in truth as well as words. Looking into her eyes, Jake realized that what had started as an act of mercy was becoming something deeper. He was beginning to care for this remarkable woman who had brought light into his solitary world. The marriage might have been born out of protection, but Jake sensed it could grow into something real if they both chose to let it. 2 months passed quietly on the Morrison ranch. Jake and Ayanna fell into a comfortable routine that felt natural, despite their unusual beginning. She taught him to identify healing plants and track animals through barely visible signs in the earth. He showed her how to repair fence posts and read the weather patterns that meant storms were coming across the Texas plains. Their relationship remained respectful, but distant. They were partners by necessity, friends by choice. But the deeper intimacy of true marriage had not developed between them. Jake slept in the main room while Ayanna kept the bedroom, and they rarely touched except when working together required it. That changed on a cold October morning when Ayanna woke Jake before dawn with urgent whispers. Someone comes, she said, pressing her hand to his shoulder. Many horses moving fast. Jake sat up immediately, grabbing his rifle. Through the window, he could see dust clouds on the horizon, still several miles away, but approaching rapidly. How many? 20, maybe more, Ayanna replied, her face grim. Not soldiers. The horses move wrong for cavalry. Jake's blood ran cold. A band of 20 riders could only mean one thing: trouble of the worst kind. Outlaws, cattle rustlers, or worse. We need to get you somewhere safe. Safe where? Ayanna asked practically. If they search the house, they will find me. If they burn it, I will die in hiding. She was right, and Jake knew it. The ranch was isolated, with no neighbors close enough to help. Whatever was coming, they would have to face it together. Can you shoot? He asked, pulling ammunition from his gun cabinet. With bow and arrow, yes. With white man's guns. Ayanna shook her head. Show me quickly. Jake spent the next few minutes teaching her how to load and fire his spare rifle. Her hands were steady as she practiced the motions, but he could see the worry in her dark eyes. They both knew that two people, no matter how well armed, could not hold off 20 determined attackers. The riders came into view as the sun crested the eastern hills. Jake cursed under his breath when he recognized the leader, Bart Nichols, a man he had hoped never to see again. Nichols was a rustler and worse, known for his cruelty and his hatred of Indians. Jake had testified against him in a cattle theft case 2 years earlier, and Nichols had sworn revenge. You know them? Ayanna asked, seeing his expression. The leader, Jake admitted. His name is Bart Nichols. He's bad news, and he has reason to want me dead. The riders surrounded the ranch house, their guns drawn and ready. Nichols sat his horse with a crooked smile that Jake remembered all too well. He was a big man with cruel eyes and scars crisscrossing his face from various fights. Jake Morrison, Nichols called out. Come on out here, boy. We need to have ourselves a talk. Jake stepped onto the porch with his rifle in hand, Ayanna close behind him. Several of the rustlers whistled and made crude comments when they saw her, but Nichols silenced them with a sharp gesture. Well, well, Nichols said, his smile widening. Heard you went and got yourself a squaw wife. Real pretty little thing, ain't she, boys? State your business and get off my land, Jake said coldly. My business? Nichols laughed. My business is settling old scores, Morrison. You cost me 2 years in prison with your testimony. Now I'm here to collect what you owe me. You were stealing cattle, Jake replied. I told the truth. Your truth cost me plenty, Nichols said, his voice turning deadly. But I'm a fair man. I'll give you a choice. You can come with us peaceful-like, or we can burn this place down with both of you in it." Jake's mind raced, looking for options. They were outnumbered 10-1 with no hope of rescue, but he had not survived this long on the frontier by giving up when things looked bad. "I have a better idea," Jake said. "You take me, but you leave my wife alone. She's done nothing to you." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong," Nichols said, his eyes glinting with malice. "See, I hear tell she's been asking questions around town, mapping out ranches, maybe planning to bring her savage friends down on us white folks." "That's a lie, and you know it," Jake snapped. "Maybe, maybe not." Nichols shrugged. "But I can't take that chance. The way I see it, the only good Indian is a dead Indian." Ayanna stepped forward, her chin raised proudly. "I am not afraid of you," she said clearly. "If you want to kill me, do it. But know that my husband will fight you until his last breath." "Husband?" Nichols laughed harshly. "You mean owner. That's all you are to him, squaw. Property he bought for $25. Jake saw red. Without thinking, he brought his rifle up, but 3 of Nichols's men already had him covered. "You're wrong," he said through gritted teeth. "She's my wife by choice, and I'll kill any man who tries to hurt her." "Big words from a dead man," Nichols said. "Boys, burn the house. We'll take them both with us and have some fun before we finish this." That was when Ayanna surprised everyone. Instead of cowering or pleading, she let out a piercing war cry that echoed across the valley. The sound was wild and fierce, raising the hair on the back of every man's neck. "What the hell was that?" one of the rustlers asked nervously. "Calling her tribe," and another said, looking around anxiously. "Ain't no tribe within 100 miles, Nichols said, but Jake could hear uncertainty in his voice. Ayanna cried out again, then began speaking rapidly in Comanche. Jake did not understand the words, but the tone was urgent, commanding. She gestured toward the hills around them as if she could see people there. "She's bluffing," Nichols said, but several of his men were already shifting nervously in their saddles. "Maybe so," said one of them. "But I heard tell the Comanche can move like ghosts when they want to. Could be 50 of them out there right now, waiting for the signal to attack." Jake began to understand Ayanna's strategy. She was playing on their fears, using their own prejudices against them. The same ignorance that made them hate her might also save their lives. "My people know where I am," she said in English, her voice carrying across the yard. "They watch from the hills. If harm comes to me or my husband, they will take revenge on every man here and his family." "You're lying," Nichols said, but he was looking around nervously now. "Am I?" Ayanna smiled coldly. "You know our reputation. We do not forget injuries. We do not forgive the murder of our own. Kill me and my death will be avenged tenfold." Jake had to admire her courage. She was one woman facing 20 armed men, yet she stood there like a queen addressing her subjects. Whether her words were true or not, they were having an effect. "Boss, maybe we should just take what we can and get out of here," one of the rustlers suggested. "I don't like the feel of this place." "Shut up," Nichols snapped, but Jake could see doubt creeping into his expression. Ayanna took advantage of his hesitation. "You came for revenge on my husband," she said. "But think carefully, is your revenge worth starting a war with the Comanche Nation? Because that is what you will do if you harm us." "There ain't no Comanche Nation left," Nichols said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Are you willing to bet your life on that?" Ayanna asked. "And the lives of all these men who follow you?" A long moment of silence stretched across the yard. Jake kept his rifle ready, knowing their lives balanced on a knife's edge. Everything depended on whether Nichols' greed and hatred were stronger than his fear. Finally, one of the younger rustlers spoke up. "Boss, I signed on to rustle cattle, not fight Indians. My pa told me stories about what the Comanche do to their enemies. I ain't dying for your personal grudge." "Me neither," another said, and several others nodded agreement. Nichols looked around at his men and saw his support crumbling. The smart thing would be to retreat and find easier prey. But Jake could see the rage building in the man's eyes. Nichols had not come all this way to be scared off by a lone Indian woman. "Fine," Nichols snarled. You men can ride out if you're yellow, but I came here to settle a score, and by God, I'm going to settle it." He spurred his horse forward, drawing his pistol as he charged toward the porch. Jake brought his rifle up, but Nichols was already firing. The bullet splintered the wooden post beside Jake's head as he dove to one side, tackling Ayanna and bringing her down behind the meager cover of the porch railing. More shots rang out as some of Nichols' men joined the fight while others wheeled their horses and rode away. Jake fired back, his bullet catching one rustler in the shoulder and spinning him from his saddle. But they were still badly outnumbered. "The barn," Jake shouted to Ayanna over the gunfire. "We can make a stand there." They ran in a crouch across the open yard, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet. Jake felt one tug at his sleeve, close enough to burn his skin. They made it to the barn and slammed the heavy door shut, just as Nichols and his remaining men reached the yard. "This just delays the inevitable, Morrison," Nichols yelled. "We'll burn you out like rats." Jake looked around the barn frantically. There were small windows high up in the walls, but no other exits. They were trapped, and it was only a matter of time before Nichols made good on his threat to burn them out. "I'm sorry," he said to Ayanna. "I brought this on you." "No," she replied, firmly checking the ammunition in her rifle. "This man's hatred brought it on us both, but we are not dead yet." As if to prove her point, she moved to one of the windows and fired at a rustler trying to sneak around behind the barn. Her shot was true, and the man yelped and retreated quickly. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Jake asked, impressed despite their desperate situation. "I learn fast when my life depends on it," Ayanna replied with a grim smile. For the next hour, they held off their attackers from the barn windows. Jake's marksmanship and Ayanna's quick learning kept the rustlers at bay, but their ammunition was running low. Worse, Jake could smell smoke. Nichols had finally carried out his threat and set fire to the barn. "We have to get out of here," Jake said, coughing as smoke filled the building. "Where?" Ayanna asked practically. "They surround us." Jake looked around desperately, then noticed something he had forgotten. A small root cellar dug into the barn floor, covered by a heavy wooden trap door. It had been there when he bought the property, probably used by the previous owner to store vegetables. "Down there," he said, pointing to the cellar. "It might lead outside, or at least keep us alive until help comes." "What help?" Ayanna asked. But she helped him pull open the trap door. The cellar was dark and cramped, barely big enough for two people. But as Jake had hoped, there was a narrow tunnel leading away from the barn, probably an old escape route dug by some previous settler who had faced similar troubles. They crawled through the tunnel as the barn burned above them, following the cramped passage for what felt like hours. Finally, they emerged near the stream, almost a quarter-mile from the ranch house. The tunnel exit was hidden by thick bushes, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. From their hiding spot, they could see the burning barn and the rustlers celebrating what they thought was their victory. Nichols was examining the ashes, probably looking for their bodies. "He will be angry when he finds no bones," Ayanna whispered. "Let him be angry somewhere else," Jake replied. "We need to get away from here and find help." But as they prepared to leave their hiding spot, Ayanna grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered urgently. "Listen." Jake strained his ears and heard it, the sound of many horses approaching from the north. His heart sank, thinking Nichols had more men coming. But as the riders came into view, Jake's eyes widened in amazement. 20 Comanche warriors rode, down from the hills, painted for war and armed with rifles as well as traditional weapons. At their head rode a man Jake recognized from wanted posters, Chief Iron Bear, one of the few war leaders still fighting instead of accepting reservation life. "Your people?" Jake whispered to Ayanna. "Some of them," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. "Iron Bear was my father's brother. He must have been watching, waiting to see what would happen to me." The warriors surrounded the surprised rustlers with military precision. Nichols and his men found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered by fighters who knew the terrain better than they ever could. "Drop your weapons," Iron Bear commanded in accented but clear English. Most of the rustlers complied immediately, but Nichols, stubborn to the end, raised his pistol toward the chief. He never got the chance to fire. 3 Comanche arrows hit him simultaneously, and he toppled from his horse. Jake and Ayanna emerged from their hiding place as the warriors finished securing the remaining rustlers. Iron Bear rode toward them, his painted face stern, but his eyes showing relief when he saw Ayanna unharmed. The chief and Ayanna spoke rapidly in Comanche for several minutes. Jake caught his own name mentioned several times, along with what sounded like questions and explanations. Finally, Iron Bear turned to address him directly. "My niece tells me you have treated her with honor," the chief said. "That you chose to protect her when you could have used her as the other white men would have." "She's my wife," Jake said simply. "Protecting her is my duty and my choice." Iron Bear studied him for a long moment. "She also tells me this marriage was made from necessity, not love. That you have given her freedom to choose her own path." Jake glanced at Ayanna, wondering what she had told her uncle about their relationship. "That's true. She's free to go with you if that's what she wants." Iron Bear translated this for the other warriors who murmured among themselves. Finally, the chief spoke again. "You are welcome among our people, Jake Morrison. Any man who would risk his life to protect one of ours has earned our respect. But the choice of where to go and what to do must be Ayanna's alone." All eyes turned to Ayanna. She looked from her uncle and the warriors who represented her past to Jake and the burned remains of the ranch that had become her present. When she spoke, it was in English so everyone could understand. "My heart is torn," she said honestly. "These are my people, my blood. But Jake has shown me a different way to live, one where Comanche and white man can work together instead of fighting." She paused, then walked to stand beside Jake. "I choose to stay with my husband and help him rebuild what was destroyed today. But I also choose to remain connected to my people, to be a bridge between two worlds that have been enemies too long." Iron Bear nodded approvingly. "Wisdom speaks through you, niece. We will not lose touch with you again. When you need us, we will come." The chief turned to Jake. "And you, white man, if you ever betray the trust my niece has placed in you, we will—" "No, and we will come for you as well." "I understand," Jake said, meaning it completely. As the warriors prepared to leave, taking the captured rustlers with them for frontier justice, Iron Bear had one final word for his niece. "Your father would be proud," he said in English, then switched to Comanche for something private. Ayanna wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her uncle and the warriors ride away. Jake put his arm around her shoulders, offering comfort, and this time she leaned into him instead of standing rigid. "What did he say at the end?" Jake asked gently. "He said that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is choose love over fear," Ayanna replied, "and that he hopes our children will grow up in a world where they do not have to choose between being Comanche or American." Jake felt his heart skip as he realized the implications of her words. For the first time, Ayanna was talking about a real future together, one that included the possibility of children and lasting love. "Is that what you want?" he asked quietly. "A real marriage? Not just one for protection?" Ayanna turned in his arms to face him. "I want to find out what we can build together," she said. "Not just a ranch, but a life, a family, a future where our children will be proud of both their heritages." Jake looked into her dark eyes and saw something that had not been there before. Not just trust or partnership, but the beginning of love. It had grown slowly between them, built on respect and shared hardship rather than passion, but it was real. "Then let's build it," he said, and kissed her for the first time. As they stood among the ashes of the old ranch, Jake and Ayanna began planning the new one they would create together. It would be stronger than before, built not just with wood and nails, but with love, trust, and the hope of a better future for all their people. Spring came early to the Morrison Ranch that year, bringing with it new life and new challenges. Jake and Ayanna had spent the winter rebuilding what Bart Nichols and his men had destroyed, but they had built something better than before. And the new house was larger, with separate rooms and windows that let in more light. The barn was stronger, designed with both practicality and beauty in mind. More importantly, Their marriage had grown stronger too. What had started as an arrangement of protection had blossomed into genuine partnership and deep affection. They worked side by side during the day and sat together by the fire at night, sharing stories and dreams for the future. The changes were not just in their relationship. Word had spread throughout the county about how Ayana's Comanche relatives had helped them against the rustlers. Some neighbors remained suspicious, but others had begun to see her differently. She was no longer just Morrison's Indian woman, but a person with her own skills and wisdom. Dr. Patterson from Cedar Creek had been the first to overcome his prejudices. When a fever swept through the town in February, killing 2 children and leaving many others sick, he had heard about Ayana's knowledge of healing plants. Swallowing his pride, he had ridden out to the ranch to ask for her help. Ayana had not hesitated. She spent 3 days in town, working alongside the doctor to treat the sick. Her herbal remedies, combined with his medical knowledge, had saved 6 lives that winter. The grateful families would never again question her right to live among them. Sheriff Williams had also become an unexpected ally. The way Ayana had handled the confrontation with Nichols had impressed him, and he made it clear to anyone who would listen that she was under his protection as a citizen of the county. But perhaps the most important change was growing inside Ayana herself. She was carrying Jake's child due to arrive with the summer heat. The pregnancy had brought them closer together and given them both a deeper sense of purpose. "Have you thought about names?" Jake asked one evening as they sat on their new porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Ayana placed her hand on her growing belly. "If it is a boy, I would like to name him Thomas, after your father. But with a Comanche name as well, Dakota, which means friend to everyone." Jake felt a warm rush of emotion. Ayana had listened to all his stories about his father, who had died when Jake was 15. Thomas Morrison had been a fair man who treated everyone with respect, regardless of their race or station in life. "Thomas Dakota Morrison," Jake said, testing how it sounded. "I like it. What if it's a girl?" "Sarah, after your mother," Ayana replied. "And Ayana, like me, Sarah Ayana Morrison." "Perfect," Jake said, taking her hand. "A name from both our worlds." Their peaceful evening was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Jake tensed, remembering the last time unexpected visitors had come to their ranch, but these riders carried torches and came openly down the main trail. Mayor Henderson led the group, accompanied by several men Jake recognized from town. Behind them rode a stranger, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit who looked distinctly uncomfortable on horseback. "Evening, Jake." "Ayana," Mayor Henderson called out as they approached. "Sorry to bother you folks, but we have a situation that requires your wife's particular expertise." Jake and Ayana exchanged glances. It was still unusual for white people to seek out Ayana's help, despite her growing reputation as a healer. "What kind of situation?" Jake asked. The stranger dismounted awkwardly and stepped forward. "My name is Robert Whitfield," he said in an educated Eastern accent. "I'm a representative of the railroad company. We're surveying for a new line that will pass near your property." Jake's heart sank. Railroad companies were notorious for taking what they wanted, regardless of who owned it. "And we've run into a problem," Whitfield continued. "Our surveying team has been discouraged from working in the area. Several of our men have been found tied up and left in embarrassing positions, completely unharmed but thoroughly humiliated." Mayor Henderson suppressed a smile. "Someone's been playing tricks on the railroad boys, making them look foolish without actually hurting them. It's costing us time and money," Whitfield said, his frustration evident. "The men are afraid to work alone, and some have quit entirely. We believe it's the work of local Indians, but we can't prove it." "What does this have to do with us?" Ayana asked, though Jake suspected she already knew. "We need someone who can communicate with them," Whitfield replied. "Someone they trust. We're prepared to offer compensation for your services as a translator and mediator." Jake looked at his wife, seeing the conflict in her eyes. She clearly knew who was behind the railroad company's troubles, but helping them might mean betraying her own people. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Ayanna asked carefully. Arrange a meeting, Whitfield said. We want to negotiate compensation for passage through their traditional hunting grounds. Better to pay a fair price than fight a war we can't win. This was unexpected. Most railroad companies simply took what they wanted and dealt with the consequences later. The fact that they were willing to negotiate suggested that Ayanna's relatives were being more effective than Jake had realized. I will speak with them, Ayanna said finally, but I make no promises about what they will say. My people have learned not to trust white man's treaties. Understood, Whitfield replied. When can you arrange this meeting? Give me 3 days, Ayanna said. And Mr. Whitfield, come to this meeting with respect, not arrogance. My uncle Iron Bear is a war chief, not a businessman. Treat him as such. The next morning, Ayanna rode out alone to the hills where she knew her people would be watching. Jake had wanted to accompany her, but she explained that the warriors would be more likely to show themselves if she came alone. She returned that evening with news that Iron Bear had agreed to the meeting, but with conditions. It would take place on neutral ground, a natural amphitheater in the hills where both sides could see each other approaching. Each side could bring no more than 5 people, and all weapons must be left with horse holders at the bottom of the hill. He's testing them, Ayanna explained to Jake. If they agree to meet on our terms, unarmed and outnumbered in unfamiliar territory, it shows they truly want peace. 3 days later, the meeting took place as arranged. Jake rode with Ayanna, Mayor Henderson, Sheriff Williams, and the nervous railroad representative into the hills. True to the agreement, they left their weapons with their horses and climbed the rocky path to the meeting place. Iron Bear was already waiting with 4 warriors, their faces painted but their manner calm. The old chief stood as the white delegation approached, his bearing dignified and commanding. Ayanna spoke first, translating introductions and explaining the purpose of the meeting. Jake watched the interplay between his wife and her uncle, seeing how naturally she moved between the 2 worlds she now inhabited. Chief Iron Bear says the railroad is like a great iron snake that devours the land. Ayanna translated. It brings change that cannot be undone. He wants to know what the white men offer in return for this change. Whitfield, to his credit, had prepared well for this meeting. He spread out maps and spoke respectfully about the railroad's route and its benefits to the region. He offered not just money, but jobs for any tribal members who wanted them, and a guarantee that certain sacred sites would be avoided. He also offers this, Whitfield said, producing a document from his case. Legal recognition of your people's rights to hunt and fish in this area, regardless of what happens with future settlement. Iron Bear listened carefully to Ayanna's translation, then spoke at length with his warriors. Finally, he addressed the delegation through his niece. My uncle says this is more than he expected, Ayanna translated. The previous railroad men wanted to take everything and give nothing, but he has conditions of his own. Iron Bear's terms were reasonable, but firm. The railroad would pay damages for any buffalo or deer herds disrupted by construction. Tribal members would be given first priority for jobs that didn't require them to leave their families for long periods. And most importantly, Ayanna would serve as the official liaison between the railroad and the tribe, ensuring that promises made would be promises kept. Your wife would become our first Indian liaison officer, Whitfield explained to Jake. It's a new position we're creating specifically for this situation. The pay would be $50 a month plus bonuses for successful conflict resolution. Jake felt a surge of pride. In less than a year, Ayanna had gone from being a captive sold for $25 to a valued mediator earning more money than most cowboys. More importantly, she was building bridges between 2 peoples who had been enemies for generations. I accept, Ayanna said after consulting with both her husband and her uncle. But I work for peace, not just for the railroad. If your company breaks its promises, I will speak for my people, not for you. Fair enough. Whitfield agreed, clearly relieved to have found a solution to his problems. As the 2 groups prepared to leave, Iron Bear approached Jake personally. Through Ayanna, he said, You have given my niece wings to fly between 2 worlds. This is a gift beyond price. In return, I offer you the protection of our people and our friendship. Tell him the gift goes both ways, Jake replied. Ayanna has made me a better man and shown me that there's more than one way to be strong. The formal agreement was signed the following week in Cedar Creek, with much of the town turning out to witness the historic event. It was the first peaceful treaty between local tribes and white settlers in over a decade, and it set a precedent for future negotiations throughout the territory. But for Jake and Ayanna, the real victory was personal. They had found a way to honor both their heritages while building something new together. As they rode home that evening, Ayanna's hand resting on her growing belly, Jake realized that their child would grow up in a world where being both Comanche and American was not just possible, but valuable. "Are you happy?" he asked as they crested the hill overlooking their ranch. "More than I ever thought possible," Ayanna replied. "When I was on that train, I thought my life was over. Now I see it was just beginning." Jake looked at their rebuilt ranch, their expanding herd, and the woman who had transformed his lonely existence into a true partnership. The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges but also full of hope. Their child would be born into a world where peace was possible, where different peoples could work together instead of fighting. It was the greatest gift they could give to the next generation, proof that love could overcome fear, and that building something together was always better than tearing each other apart. 5 years had passed since that fateful day when Jake Morrison chose the Comanche woman with Shackles from a line of desperate brides. The Morrison Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the county, but more importantly, it had become a symbol of what was possible when different peoples worked together instead of against each other. Sarah Ayanna Morrison was now 4 years old, a bright and curious child with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn determination. She spoke both English and Comanche fluently, switching between languages as easily as she switched between playing with her carved wooden horses and her traditional Comanche doll made by her great-uncle Iron Bear. Thomas Dakota Morrison had arrived, 2 years after his sister, and at 2 years old, he was already showing signs of his parents' strong wills. The boy could ride a horse before he could walk properly, and he had an uncanny ability to calm frightened animals just by talking to them in his gentle voice. Jake stood on the porch of their expanded house watching his children play in the yard while Ayanna tended to her garden. She had taught him that the same land could feed both cattle and people if you understood how to work with nature instead of against it. Her vegetable garden now supplied not just their family, but several neighbors who had learned to appreciate both her wisdom and her friendship. "Papa, look!" Sarah called out, pointing to the horizon where dust clouds signaled approaching riders. "Someone's coming!" Jake shaded his eyes and counted at least a dozen horses moving toward the ranch. For a moment, old fears returned, memories of Bart Nichols and his gang. But these riders moved openly, without the furtive approach of men, planning violence. As they drew closer, Jake recognized the lead rider and smiled. Judge Harrison from the territorial capital was paying them a visit, accompanied by what appeared to be officials and perhaps some newspaper men. This could only mean one thing: news about the statehood petition that had been working its way through Congress. "Ayanna," Jake called to his wife, "we have important visitors coming." She looked up from her garden, wiping dirt from her hands, on her apron. In 5 years of marriage, she had learned to read her husband's moods as well as he could read hers. "Good news or bad news?" she asked. "From Judge Harrison's expression, I'd say very good news," Jake replied. The delegation reached the ranch house just as Ayanna finished washing her hands and Jake gathered the children. Judge Harrison dismounted with a broad smile on his weathered face. "Jake, Ayanna, congratulations," he announced without preamble. "Congress has approved statehood for Texas. We're officially part of the United States of America as of next month." Cheer went up from the other riders, and Jake felt a surge of excitement. Statehood meant stability, better law enforcement, and economic opportunities that had been impossible under territorial status. "There's more," Judge Harrison continued. "The new state government wants to establish an official Department of Indian Affairs, and Governor-elect Roberts has specifically requested that Ayanna be appointed as the first director of tribal relations." Jake felt his jaw drop. His wife would be offered one of the most important positions in the new state government, a role that would put her at the center of shaping policy for all tribes within Texas borders. What would that involve? Ayanna asked carefully. She had learned to be cautious about offers from government officials, no matter how well-intentioned they seemed. You would oversee all negotiations between the state and tribal governments, Judge Harrison explained. Ensuring that treaties are honored, conflicts are resolved peacefully, and that tribal rights are protected under state law. It's a position created specifically because of your success with the railroad negotiations and your work mediating disputes over the past few years. Jake knew his wife well enough to see the conflict in her eyes. This was an incredible opportunity to make a real difference for her people and all the tribes in Texas. But it would also mean spending significant time in the state capital, away from their ranch and their children. I need time to think about this, Ayanna said diplomatically, and I need to discuss it with my family and my uncle Iron Bear. Of course, Judge Harrison replied, but I should mention that the position comes with a substantial salary, $300 a month, plus travel expenses and housing allowances when you're required to be in the capital. Jake whistled softly. $300 a month was more money than most ranchers made in a year. It would provide security for their children's education and their family's future in ways that cattle ranching, no matter how successful, never could. That evening, after the delegation had departed and the children were asleep, Jake and Ayanna sat on their porch discussing the offer. The decision would affect not just them, but their children and potentially thousands of other people. What does your heart tell you? Jake asked, taking her hand. My heart says I could help many people, Ayanna replied honestly. But it also says I don't want to leave our life here. This ranch, our children, the peace we've built, these things are precious to me. They're precious to me too, Jake said. But maybe there's a way to have both. Over the next few days, they worked out a plan. Ayanna would accept the position, but with conditions. She would divide her time between the ranch and the capital, spending no more than 2 weeks away at a time. Jake would hire additional help for the ranch so he could occasionally accompany her on important trips. Most importantly, their children would grow up on the ranch, connected to the land and both sides of their heritage. Iron Bear rode in from the hills 2 days later, having heard about the offer through the network of communication that still connected tribal groups across the territory. He was accompanied by several other tribal leaders, including Chief Running Wolf of the Kiowa and Chief Standing Bear of the Tonkawa. This is a great honor for our people, Iron Bear told his niece through their traditional greeting ritual. For the first time, we will have a voice in the white man's government who truly understands our ways. But with great honor comes great responsibility, warned Chief Running Wolf. You will walk between two worlds every day, representing people who do not always agree with each other. Ayanna nodded solemnly. I understand. That is why I want to establish a council of tribal representatives who will advise me. I cannot speak for all peoples, but together, we might find wisdom. The tribal leaders spent 3 days at the Morrison Ranch, planning what would become known as the Texas Tribal Council. It would be an unprecedented experiment in cooperative governance, bringing together traditional enemies to work toward common goals. Jake marveled at watching his wife navigate these complex negotiations. She had grown from a frightened captive into a diplomat capable of bringing together groups that had been fighting each other for generations. Her ability to see all sides of an issue while never losing sight of fundamental principles made her uniquely qualified for the challenges ahead. The formal ceremony installing Ayanna as Director of Tribal Relations took place in Austin on a crisp October morning. Jake stood proudly in the audience with their children, watching as his wife was sworn in by the new governor himself. She wore a dress that combined traditional Comanche beadwork with modern styling, a perfect symbol of the bridge she represented. You solemnly swear to uphold the Constitution and laws of the state of Texas, while faithfully representing the interests of all tribal peoples within our borders? Governor Roberts asked. I do, Ayanna replied in a clear, strong voice that carried throughout the packed chamber. As applause filled the room, Jake saw tears of pride in the eyes of the tribal leaders who had traveled from across Texas to witness this historic moment. For the first time since white settlement began, their peoples would have a real voice in the government that controlled their lives. But the ceremony that meant the most to Jake took place that evening in their hotel room. Sarah and Thomas had been restless all day, overwhelmed by the crowds and formal proceedings. As Ayanna tucked them into bed, Sarah asked the question that had been on her mind. "Mama, are you going to be gone all the time now?" Ayanna sat on the edge of the bed and gathered both children close. "No, little one. I will travel sometimes to help people, just like Papa travels to sell cattle. But I will always come home to you." "Promise?" Thomas asked in his serious 2-year-old voice. "I promise," Ayanna said, kissing both children goodnight. "Home is where our family is, and nothing will ever change that." Later, as Jake and Ayanna stood on the hotel balcony looking out over the lights of Austin, they reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't chosen you that day?" Jake asked. Ayanna leaned against his shoulder. "I try not to think about such things. The path we didn't take is less important than the one we did." "Still," Jake persisted, "you could have been chosen by someone else or sent to a reservation or I could have died of despair," Ayanna finished quietly. "But you showed me that there was still hope in the world, still kindness among white people. You gave me not just life but a reason to live." Jake wrapped his arms around his wife, the mother of his children, and the woman who had transformed not just his life but the lives of countless others. "You gave me the same gift," he said. "I was just existing before you came. Now I'm truly living." As they looked out over the city that would partially become their new home, they could see the future taking shape. Their children would grow up in a world where being both Comanche and Texan was not a contradiction but a strength. The ranch would continue to prosper, serving as a model for how different peoples could work together. And Ayanna's work in government would help ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated in the future. The cowboy who had pointed to a Comanche girl with shackles had chosen more than a bride that day. He had chosen to believe that love was stronger than hate, that building was better than destroying, and that the best way to honor the past was to create a better future. Their story had become legend throughout Texas, proof that even in the hardest times, people could choose hope over fear, understanding over prejudice, and love over all the forces that tried to divide them. It was a legacy they would pass on to their children, and through them to generations yet to come. The choice Jake Morrison made on that dusty day in Cedar Creek had changed not just 2 lives, but the entire trajectory of a state learning to define itself. Sometimes the most important decisions come not from grand planning, but from simple moments when someone chooses to do what's right rather than what's easy. And sometimes those choices echo through history, creating ripples of change that continue long after the original decision-makers are gone. Jake and Ayanna's love story became Texas's story, a tale of 2 peoples learning to become one, stronger together than they ever could have been apart.